For over 6 agonizing years, the city of Tunceli was forced to live under the shadow of a single, highly orchestrated narrative. A 21-year-old university student, full of life, ambitions, and dreams, walks onto a lonely, wind-swept bridge on January 5, 2020. She stares into the freezing, murky waters of the Dinar Dam Lake, and she jumps. Case closed. A tragic, isolated suicide in a remote province. This was the story the authorities told. This was the story the media repeated. This was the story etched into the official state files. But secrets buried in the dark have a way of clawing their way to the surface. In the spring of 2026, the artificial lake did not yield a body. Instead, the political landscape cracked wide open, and the masks of the elite shattered into pieces. What was carefully buried as a personal tragedy has now exploded into one of the most chilling institutional cover-ups in modern criminal history. The suspects in the disappearance of Gülistan Doku are no longer just abusive ex-boyfriends hiding in the shadows. Today, they wear high-ranking badges. They sit in gubernatorial mansions. They control the servers of public hospitals. They are the sons of the absolute elite. This is no longer a simple missing person case. This is a story of a deep state cleanup, an elite bloodline protected at all costs, and a system that turned a horrific murder into a ghost story. To truly comprehend the terrifying depth of the 2026 explosions, we must first step back into the fog of January 2020. We must look at the smokescreen that was constructed around Gülistan Doku from the very hour she vanished. Gülistan was a student at Munzur University studying child development. She was a bright young woman, but her life was plagued by a highly toxic, volatile relationship with a young man named Zeynel Abakarov. Zeynel was not just any ordinary citizen. His stepfather, Engin Yücer, was a well-connected local police officer working within the Tunceli security forces. This single familial link would become the pivot upon which the entire case would later spin out of control. The nightmare began on the night of January 4th, 2020. Witnesses and later investigative reports show that Zeynel Abakarov violently confronted Gülistan in the middle of the street. Eyewitnesses reported that Zeynel tried to physically force Gülistan into a vehicle against her will. Citizens intervened. A physical altercation was averted, and the police were notified. But because Zeynel's stepfather was who he was, the incident was downplayed. No immediate arrests were made. No protective custody was offered. Gülistan was sent back to her dormitory, terrified, trapped, and completely exposed to her tormentor. The next morning, January 5th, marked the final day Gülistan Doku was ever seen alive. CCTV footage from a local pastry shop captures her meeting Zeynel one last time. The body language in the video is tense, heavy, and frantic. They argue fiercely in broad daylight. Gülistan walks away, stepping onto a public minibus. According to the driver, she got off near the Dinar Bridge. And from that exact moment, the official timeline turns into a black hole. Between the hours of 4 p.m. and 7 p.m. that evening, Zeynel Abakarov's phone was active, pinging off local cell towers. Yet, when Gülistan's friends frantically tried to call him, realizing she hadn't returned to the dorms, his phone went completely unanswered. 3 hours of absolute silence. 3 hours that would define the next 6 years of structural deception. When Gülistan's family raised the alarm, the machinery of the local state apparatus did not move to investigate a kidnapping or a homicide. Instead, they immediately built a wall of misdirection. Engin Yücer, the policeman's stepfather, was actively involved in the initial phases of the investigation, effectively controlling the narrative from the inside. Mysteriously, official police logs regarding the family's movements that night were altered, delayed, or written with extreme ambiguity. Within days, the local government announced a definitive theory. Gülistan had committed suicide. They pointed exclusively to the Dinar Bridge. They pointed to the massive deep waters of the Munzur Dam reservoir. For 2 straight years, specialized dive teams, autonomous underwater vehicles, and military personnel dragged the bottom of that lake. They searched every square inch of the freezing mud. They found absolutely nothing. No clothing, no personal items, no body. Yet, every time the family demanded a deeper look into Zainal Abakarov, every time they pointed out the glaring contradictions in his family's alibis, the answer from the governor's office and the local police chief was always the same. Be patient. She is in the water. We will find her in the water. It was a calculated distraction, designed to let the trail go cold, to let the evidence rot, and to allow the primary suspects to quietly slip away from the province. In late 2022, the state officially called off the search. The case was quietly filed away under unresolved missing persons. The narrative of her self-destruction was set in stone. But a crime of this magnitude requires too many people to keep their mouths shut forever. The perfect smokescreen began to suffocate its own creators. The turning point came when a new administration took over the Tunceli Chief Prosecutor's office. Chief Prosecutor Ebru Cansu, completely unaligned with the local political networks that had dominated the region for years, ordered the entire case file to be unsealed, dragged out of the archives, and scrutinized from scratch. The new investigative team bypassed local police departments entirely, handing the raw digital data over to the National Criminal Bureau. The forensic tech experts spent months reanalyzing over 700 hours of hidden city surveillance, Mobese, and traffic cameras from January 2020. And then came the first devastating crack in the wall of lies. The National Criminal Bureau delivered an absolute, undeniable scientific verdict. There was 0 human movement on the Dinar Bridge during the hours Gülistan was alleged to have jumped. The bridge was completely empty. The water calculations did not add up. Gülistan Doku had never jumped from that bridge. The entire suicide theory was an absolute, manufactured fabrication. If she didn't jump, where was she? And, more importantly, who built the lie? The answers led straight to the highest offices of power in the province. In April 2026, the dominoes began to fall at a terrifying speed. The first major explosion shook the political foundations of the country. Tunceli Sonel, the former governor of Tunceli, the very man who had overseen the province during the height of the missing persons search, was stripped of his official standing by the Ministry of the Interior. He was cornered, detained, and placed under criminal arrest. The charge was not negligence. It was not a simple mistake. The former governor of the state was officially charged with systematically destroying, hiding, and altering criminal evidence to protect a network of killers. When he was brought into the Central Security Headquarters for questioning, the sheer arrogance of the institutional cover-up was on full display. Sonel reportedly looked at the interrogating officers and stated coldly, "I am a governor of this state. I do not give statements to common police officers. I will only speak directly to the high prosecutors." But the prosecution had a weapon that the former governor could not silence. Why would a powerful, highly decorated state official put his entire career, his reputation, and his freedom on the line to cover up the disappearance of an ordinary university student? The dark answer came to light with the simultaneous arrest of his own son, Mustafa Turkay Sonel. In a shocking development that rewrote the entire history of this case, Mustafa Sonel was arrested and thrown into a high-security cell, charged with premeditated murder. The prosecution's file revealed a terrifying piece of evidence: a legally intercepted, leaked wiretap recording. In the audio file, an associate close to the family was caught discussing the dark reality of what happened in January 2020. The transcript of the wiretap alleges a horrifying sequence of events. Mustafa Sonel had been involved in a secret, highly classified relationship with Gülistan Doku. She had allegedly become pregnant. Fearing an explosive public scandal that would ruin his father's prestigious political dynasty and expose their inner circles, a confrontation took place. The wiretap claims that Mustafa Sonel took a firearm, pointed it at Gülistan's head, and pulled the trigger. During his formal arraignment, Mustafa Sonel looked into the eyes of the judge and vehemently denied the charges, claiming he had never met Gülistan Doku in his entire life and that the allegations were nothing more than a political conspiracy. But the judiciary, backed by newly recovered automated license plate tracking data and secret cell tower pings, rejected his defense. The governor's son was locked behind bars.
The conspiracy, however, ran far deeper than a father covering up the blood on his son's hands. To pull off a grand deception that lasts for 6 years, you don't just control the police. You must clean up the entire digital footprint across every state institution. As cyber forensic experts dug deeper into Gülistan's final days, they uncovered a massive anomaly within the medical records system. Official state police network files proved that exactly 5 days before she vanished, on December 31, 2019, Gülistan Doku had visited the Tunceli State Hospital. It was a critical visit, one that likely held the medical proof of her pregnancy and the physical state she was in. But when the new prosecutors pulled the internal servers of the hospital's health information management system, they found a black hole. The log files for that entire week, specifically the records tracking Gülistan Doku's medical examinations, had been completely wiped out. This wasn't a system glitch. Forensic analysis proved that a professional software tool had been deliberately deployed to scrub the hospital's central servers clean, deleting any trace of her medical reality. The hammer of justice struck immediately. Kadash Özdemir, the chief physician of the Tunceli State Hospital during that period, was arrested in his home. Alongside him, multiple high-level IT specialists and system administrators were taken into custody. The charge was tampering with state medical infrastructure to erase vital evidence in a homicide investigation. A public hospital had been turned into a digital crime scene cleanup crew. By May 2026, the sheer volume of high-profile arrests forced the central government to make an unprecedented move. The case had grown too dangerous to be handled locally. The network of suspects was too powerful, too deeply entrenched in the regional prison systems. There were immense fears of witness intimidation, internal coordination, and the potential destruction of remaining physical evidence from within the cell blocks. A midnight transport order was signed. 11 high-profile defendants, including the original suspect, Zainal Abakarov, his policeman's stepfather, Engin Yutser, his mother, Jamil Yutser, the governor's son, Mustafa Turkey Sonel, the governor's personal protection officer, Shukru Erolu, and the former police data technician, Gökhan Ertok, were pulled from their standard cells in Elazığ. Under heavily armed military escort, they were loaded into armored transport vans. They were stripped of their privileges and transferred to the notorious Erzurum H-type high-security maximum closed prison. This facility is designed for the most dangerous elements, terrorists, and high-threat organized crime figures. They are now kept in isolated, high-security cages, completely cut off from the local networks they once used to rule the province. Meanwhile,
a massive international manhunt is underway. One of the key civilian figures tied to the night of the cover-up, Umut Altash, managed to flee the country as the investigation reopened, escaping across the borders to the United States. The Turkish Ministry of Justice has officially initiated an Interpol Red Notice demanding his immediate arrest and extradition back to face the tribunal. The engineered lie of the depressed girl who chose to end her life on a lonely bridge is officially dead. 6 years of tears, 6 years of a family begging for the truth on the cold asphalt of protest squares were met with an iron wall of institutional silence. But as the cells close around governors, doctors, and police officers in May 2026, the true, horrifying shape of case number 168 stands revealed. The deep, freezing waters of the Munzur River never swallowed Gülistan Doku. A brutal, protective, elite system did. They stole her life. They erased her medical records. They rewrote the police logs, and they built a monument of lies on top of her memory. But the ground is shaking. The truth is breathing, and the final reckoning has just begun.